let's start in Washington because of this significant decision by the US Supreme Court. It's ruled that employers who fire workers for being gay or transgender are breaking the country's civil rights laws. This is, as you'd imagine, a major win for LGBTQ workers and their allies. The court ruled 6-3 that federal law, which prohibits discrimination based on sex, should be understood to include sexual orientation. And all of this comes even though many thought the Supreme Court had become more conservative because of the new appointees made by President Trump. One of them, Judge Neil Gorsuch, he wrote the majority opinion saying an employer who fires an individual for being homosexual or transgender fires that person for traits or actions it would not have questioned in members of a different sex. Well, we've just had a reaction to this ruling from President Trump. He says, we will live with the decision, and he said it was a powerful one.
No, they've ruled. I've read the decision, and some people were surprised, but they've ruled, and we live with their decision. That's what it's all about. We live with the decision of the Supreme Court. Very powerful, a very powerful decision, actually. But they have so ruled.
His Democratic rival for the presidency, Joe Biden, was a little more effusive earlier, saying today's decision is another step on our march toward equality for all. The Supreme Court has confirmed the simple but profoundly American idea that every human being should be treated with respect. But we're not done, he adds. Well, I've been speaking to the BBC's Anthony Zerka in Washington about why people were surprised by this ruling.
Well, you have to view this ruling in the context of what the Supreme Court had been doing over the past 2 decades on gay rights issues. Back in the early 2000s, it struck down a Texas ban on sodomy. Then about 15 years later, it legalized gay marriage across the country. So you'd seen this progression in the Supreme Court to expanding an interpretation of gay rights. But that was a different court. And as you mentioned, there were 2 new conservative justices appointed to this court, replacing one of them, Anthony Kennedy, who was the author of those landmark gay rights decisions. So there was a lot of concern among LGBTQ folks that this would be a chance for the court to start to pare back some of this expansive reading, particularly looking at Justice Gorsuch, as you mentioned, Justice Kavanaugh coming onto the court. That ended up not being the case, though, although Kavanaugh did vote with the 3 justices who voted against this reading.
And clearly for people within the LGBTQ community, this is the outcome they were hoping for. But has there been a lot of heat around this? Is there another side to the argument where there's some people who are trying to stop this from happening? And what reasons could they give for trying to stop it?
Well, I think, because this was essentially an argument over a reading of a 1964 law, the protections in this 1964 law that prohibited employment discrimination based on religion, based on race, based on creed, and based on sex. And what they were saying, their arguments were that these members of Congress who passed this law looked and said they weren't considering gay rights, they weren't certainly considering transgender rights when they said you couldn't discriminate based on sex. And the idea of sex as something that could be changed by an individual over the course of their lives, that wasn't something that these lawmakers considered. And if Congress wanted to include gay rights, transgender rights in that law, they should go out and pass it explicitly rather than waiting on the court to interpret it itself.